What's up, everybody? Welcome to our channel today, and welcome to this episode of Let's Talk About It. Karla and Kēvin are here as always, and they're going to be talking about representation. From films like Black Panther, all the way to our Vice President-elect and Kamala Harris. Why is representation so important? Why do people stress it so much? And what does it mean for the believer? That's what they're going to be talking about today. So enjoy it, share it with a friend, go ahead and like the video, comment if you enjoy it, and we're glad you're here as always. Let's talk about it.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you guys for tuning in on another episode 13.
Really?
Of Let's Talk About It, yeah.
Uh-oh.
Well, maybe it's 11. Whatever.
I don't know.
It's a number. Welcome. My name is Kēvin. I'm the youth director at In Focus Church, and I'm joined by
Karla Gerard. I am the director of outreach and missions here at In Focus Church, and I am happy to be here today conversing with Kēvin.
Yeah, we are loving this segment of Let's Talk About It, which is what I originally thought that we should name it. So Karla actually showed her mug, and I wanted to show mine. So
that's a huge mug.
It is. But look at how vivid that taco is. Hopefully that's clear in there. I don't know, but I really like it.
That's lovely.
It is. It's great. So today we are discussing the topic of representation. Something that is pretty common. It's a hot topic, if you want to use that, in our society right now. And I figured it would be good to just start off by talking about the definition of representation. So I found a couple of things online, just on what's the 1828?
Webster's
Dictionary. Yeah. So it says the act of representing, describing, or showing that which exhibits by resemblance, image, likeness, picture, or statue as representations of God. And then a third definition, the standing in the place of another as an heir or in the right of taking by inheritance. Interesting definitions, but it all points to this idea of saying, hey, what we see should reflect what is. That's what a representative is. You know, if you even think about, gosh, man, my brain is drawing a blank. Christ says that we are ambassadors, kind of ambassadors. That means that we are going out on behalf of Christ. We are Christians, little Christ. We are supposed to look like Christ. And so this topic of representation in our media, in positions of power, the whole discussion is based around saying we should have people in power. We should have people on screens that look like us.
Yeah.
That's essentially it. And that conversation really applies to any minority group, whether it's ethnicity related or gender, women. There's more women in America than men. But when it comes to representation, that's not true. It's the converse. And so, we have an interesting discussion for today.
Now, when you gave that definition, what did you say? It's what we see should represent what is. We sing a song here at church that's fairly new of us singing it, that we are glory's reflection. And it's a line that popped off the screen to me when we started singing it, because I was like, that is, when we are Christ's ambassadors in the earth, we're supposed to reflect him.
Yeah.
That's who should be seen. And when it comes to representation, we should be pulling for representation to be reflective of all of God's creation.
Right.
So that's where I know where we're going today.
Yeah. I was as I was preparing, I came across some information about how President-elect Joe Biden, he's promised that his cabinet would be the most diverse that there has ever been, which I think not endorsing those cabinet members or any policies or anything like that, but on that principle, saying we're a church that values being multi-ethnic and multi-generational.
Yeah.
I think that if we recognize that is the heart of God, that's what heaven is going to look like. I think that at basis, if we're seeking to obey Scripture, which tells us to find things that are praiseworthy, then we can look at that principle and say, man, that's worthy of applause.
Yeah, absolutely.
I could commend that.
Yeah.
So I believe you have some questions for us to talk through today.
I do. Are you ready?
I think I'm ready. Well, actually,
okay, go ahead.
Let me start on maybe a lighthearted note. When I think of the topic of representation, I remember my childhood where I remember the first time that I was watching TV, watching cartoons, and I really, kind of got a feel that I was represented. I wouldn't have used that vocabulary, as a kid, but watching the screen, I remember the kind of aha moment, like, oh, wow, there's someone on the screen that looks like me. Mm-hmm. It was X-Men. My dad raised me as a huge X-Men fan. Many characters, Wolverine, Magneto, Cyclops, there's a lot. But as a kid, I noticed that there weren't many, if any, brown-skinned X-Men characters. And so if you don't know, X-Men is about mutants, humans that were born with genetic mutations in their DNA, so they had powers.
Right.
And so the character that I felt like I could identify with was Nightcrawler, even though, again, they're mutants, so some mutants might have humane physical features, but have powers of telekinesis or something like that. Nightcrawler had 3 fingers on each hand and 3 toes on each foot. And he also had a tail. So he looked very weird. Okay. He was an outcast. People would look at him and say, oh, you're a demon. Like, we don't want you here. They would try to, they didn't like him. They hated him. But even though the humans on the cartoon looked at him in that way, as a kid, I remember looking saying, your skin is blue. You're not even brown like me. But I feel like I could relate to you better than I could relate to Wolverine or any of the others. And it's sad.
Yes, it is sad.
There's very much a bittersweet reality or emotion that comes with it, where it's like, man, it stinks that as a kid I had that moment where at 8 years old I finally felt represented, but at the same time it's worth celebrating.
Yeah, so. I think that's very sad. I just finished the first segment of us doing a Be the Bridge training here at In Focus Church, and we're going to continue to run those in 2021. Mm-hmm. But in particular, the section on white identity was bringing to the forefront, kind of forcing us to look at the representation we've seen in our country.
Yeah.
And most of it is on the screen of power or places of decision making, or if it came to good versus evil, the power decision making and the good side was white. Mm. Or if a black character came into the scene, like we used Back to the Future, old movie. I don't even know if you would have seen it, but it was, you don't have to. But the only time there were non-white characters in the movie was a band. Was a black band, so an entertainment purpose. Mm-hmm. And when the band got out of the car to come to the stage, it was clear that what they were trying to say was the band had been smoking pot inside the car. So there was nothing necessarily positive. So me and Brent, my husband, whom obviously you know us, we have 5 kids. The 3 oldest are biological. They're white. Our youngest 2 are black. And when I think about my daughter looking at, let's say, a Disney movie, and if she wanted to dress up as a princess, her selection of dressing up into a character that looks like her is quite limited. Yeah. In fact, as a little black girl, it's extremely limited. There are some other non-white lead female characters, but not many compared. So when it comes to representation on the screen or in platforms, and I know we're going to get into the more serious side, but that is a serious thing. Yeah, it's serious for my little girl to stand in front of a row of dolls at Walmart, let's say, and the majority of them are white. Or when she grows up to stand at the makeup line or makeup aisle in Kroger or Walmart, just some place we might frequent, and there's all this choice for white skin, light skin makeup, and then this tiny thing for, makeup for people of color. Or the fact that, and I don't know that we often think this way, that in our country, everything is set up in comparison to whiteness.
Yeah.
For instance, if there's a self-tanner, I know Dove I think I might have mentioned this before, but they got into a little bit of trouble for having a self-tanner, self-tanning lotion color that was darker than normal, was the name of it. Therefore saying that normal was light and darker was not normal. Yeah. And so they redid that campaign. So one of my hearts today, or part of my heart today, is let you have the platform and what I'm learning in my own training as a person of color, to be able to talk about representation, and then I'll add in some things, in particular where it comes to me being a woman.
Yeah.
That's yes.
Fair.
You ready for my question?
I'm ready.
Okay. I have it here in my notes app. Why does it matter biblically and socially when it comes to representation?
I think that's a great question, emphasizing the biblical side of it, because what I didn't mention earlier in that definition of representation in our culture is that it can include things that aren't lining up with biblical standards, our biblical convictions.
Yeah.
And so there are in this topic of representation, there is the inclusion of gender identity and sexual orientation and other things. But for the purposes of what we're talking about, I think biblically speaking, we see, or the main thing that I think of is kind of what Pastor Brent spoke to a couple Sundays ago, talking about how when Lazarus died, Jesus was there. He was in the presence of Mary and Martha, where the emotions were high. They realized, like, man, this is frustrating. This is sad. Jesus, if only you had gotten here sooner. Mm-hmm. And in a moment where Jesus could have said, don't worry about it. What do you see what I'm about to do? Like, I'm everything is okay. Dry your eyes. We find the shortest scripture in the Bible, which is Jesus wept. Mm-hmm. Jesus shared in that emotion. And scripture doesn't go in great detail about why Jesus cried, and we can kind of infer some things. But the point that we can directly pull is that Jesus shared in the suffering. He shared in the emotion. He shared in the moment with Mary and Martha. Yeah. And I think that as followers of Jesus who seek to follow his example, but also sharing his heart, realizing that Jesus came to earth, continuing that principle, he came to earth sharing in the sufferings and the temptations of mankind. We see that theme that is true to God's heart, that part of love is loving with. It's not just loving and doing for, it's loving with. It's bringing those sufferings, bringing those challenges, and sharing with them, even if they're not unique to our personal experience, but recognizing, hey, this is what you're going through. Well, I want to be in that with you, mm-hmm. Even if it's uncomfortable. So I think that biblically speaking, instead of just trying to point to a certain scripture or a text, which is it's fine, we can do that. But I just think we see God's heart through those examples of Christ coming to earth, Christ's interaction with Mary and Martha, the woman at the well. Like we could go through countless examples and realize that God's heart is not just to separate and say, it'll be okay, don't worry about that, but instead there's the sharing of emotion, there's sharing of suffering. And in our society, that's what we see, is that, as you mentioned, little kids should not go to the store asking for a Barbie doll and only seeing a certain color. Mm-hmm. Where we, in Memphis, we went through the,
Civil
Rights Museum. And we came across the study that the psychologists did that ultimately showed that children, when they see a choice between a white baby doll and a black baby doll, during that time, the children wanted the white baby doll, but they did not want the black baby doll. And when asked why, the children would say, it's dirty, mm-hmm. it's ugly, it's disgusting, where those descriptions were labeled on the color of the baby doll. Mm-hmm. They were identical and everything else. They were clean. They were kept like it was a perfectly normal baby doll. Mm-hmm. The only difference was color. Mm-hmm. And so if that mindset was present then, and even though we can say, okay, the laws and times have changed now, when it comes to representation, that topic is still relevant today.
Oh, absolutely.
Where if you don't see, as a kid, as an 8-year-old kid watching X-Men at that time, because that was the first non-white superhero, it opened my mind's imagination to be able to think and consider, man, what if I were a superhero? Which, of course, I mean, it's easy to kind of knock that away, like, you can't be a superhero. But as a kid trying to dream, it shifted away from white people save the world to God can use anyone.
That's right.
Like it's difficult.
Yeah, that's why it was a great loss for our country when Chadwick Boseman died. Now, Black Panther's my favorite Marvel movie, but and probably somewhat because I felt like I saw representation on the screen of a people group that had been oppressed for so long. I think some of this, as we've said before on these segments, just common sense of thinking back through my lifetime of watching movies, music, where I went to school, who was in positions of power, in decision making. When Black Panther came out, and it was it's just a fantastic movie. I just love it.
Yeah.
But when Chadwick Boseman died, I think there's a couple things to say about what he did for young Black boys and the Black community in our country. He, first of all, was a superhero who was honest and who fought fair.
Yeah.
And when he passed, my youngest son, being 10 years old at the time, it was sad.
Yeah.
I mean, we cried that in seeing pictures of kids all over our country, all over the world, that were in tears because their superhero had died. And I think even off screen, what we saw in Chadwick Boseman's life as, the superhero of all of our young ones was he had struggled with a disease and a sickness for maybe it was 3 or 4 years, and even the people closest to him didn't even know how intense the struggle was because he was so other-centered that he had led a life that said, "Hey, follow me."
Yeah.
And it was sad.
Yeah.
And there have been, other young actresses that have passed away that it's sad in general. And I think we can, just as Jesus did, even when not endorsing everything someone stands for, when there's a loss, Christians should weep with those who weep and mourn with those who mourn.
Right.
So, the Brown versus Board of Education display at Civil Rights Museum is shocking to the system if you read it with emotional health, because there's no way that mindset just goes away.
Right.
It doesn't. It'll take generations for it to go away. And so we would encourage you to read more about that particular struggle in our nation.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I'm glad you mentioned Chadwick, because for me, another personal note, like Chadwick Boseman in Black Panther was the reason why I wanted to grow my hair out in the first place. Where if you've been watching these episodes, you can see my hair looks different from normal.
I love it.
Thank you. And just for me, what I grew up seeing was that if a Black man had long hair, whether it's dreadlocks, braids, cornrows, whatever, if a Black man had long hair, he was either an athlete or a rapper. And in those realms, he could be successful. But if he had long hair and was not a rapper or an athlete, he was portrayed as, or the conversation always shifted towards, he's up to no good, he's doing something illegal, or he can't get a real job because that is an unkempt style. It just looks unprofessional. And for a long time, I grew up believing that same thing, where when I saw Black Panther, still in the media and entertainment world as an actor, but one, it was just like, wait a second, that was desired here because it's a Black superhero. Like and Black Panther isn't a new character in the comic book world, but it's now on screens where we're seeing this and it's celebrated. That was amazing for me. But then, seeing his character on screen and off screen and seeing, man, this is a guy who pursues excellence. He seeks to do well. His role as the superhero and as king show that he valued integrity. Just the whole character behind the character. It struck me in a way that said, man, as a 20-something-year-old man, I'm looking at this guy saying, I want to be like that. I know it's a fictional world, but in my life, I want to be a man of integrity. I want to be a man of honor. I want to be a faithful man. That's why I got the tattoo. But I now see, like, man, I can do that and look like how I want to look. I can let my hair be the style that I want, and I don't have to bring other people's negative opinions on myself and let them dictate to me what professional looks like. I can let my character speak for itself. I can let my work ethic speak for itself, and let my hair just be the style that I want to style it in.
Yeah.
That was huge for me.
And I think for, I don't speak for all white people, and you don't speak for all black people, but I will say this, for a white person to consider when it comes to representation and entertainment, would they want everyone to think that every white man was like Cousin Eddie on the Christmas Vacation?
Yeah.
Who mooched, didn't work hard, seemingly uneducated, or all like Nicolas Cage's character in Raising Arizona.
Yeah.
I mean, we wouldn't want that.
Right.
And yet I think that when it comes to our black brothers and sisters, I heard this in our training, racialization exists. Whether you want to believe it or not, it exists. It's been around. It's a part of, and there's some things I even wanted to, and I will mention before we exit today about just where we may not have realized when it's all put into one particular conversation where just misrepresentation or lack of representation is present in our world.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's huge where I think, because I know the second question, but you haven't mentioned it yet, but going in that direction, we see that representation is not just, let's put one person from each minority group on screen or in power, and then it's okay.
Yeah.
Because it's not just the number, but it's realizing that representation means that someone is representing for that community. And again, you can't speak, it's the crazy balance of our democracy even, where we know that one person cannot speak for their entire ethnicity or race or any people group, but that's what we expect them to do nonetheless.
Right.
And so if we imagine a world where, all of our elected officials are all the same gender and all the same ethnicity, we could realize that they cannot, if they can't even speak for your opinion personally, then we got to realize that how can they, I'm trying to make sure I word this right. If they can't speak for, if everything that they say will not speak for your personal opinions and convictions, even if they share the same gender and ethnicity as you, then how can they do that for a different gender and ethnicity? Whereas a white elected official, they did not live the same experiences that me as a black man did, or a Hispanic man, or a Asian man. And so having elected officials and people on these screens that, yes, look like me, that's part of the conversation. But the other step is realizing, okay, how they are portrayed. Are they portrayed as someone that, only does music and it sounds good, but then they go smoke weed? Or they, only are moochers who, don't work for themselves and they're lazy? That portrayal, that representation of their character, of their background, and of their experience is equally important.
Yeah.
Which means that those stories have to be told by people who look like them, people who experience those things.
Yeah.
And that's important.
It is important. So as we're learning, we could talk about representation for weeks upon end, weeks on end, not upon end. But as we're learning, even in this short segment today, about what representation means, and hopefully it's jogging some of our thoughts to look deeper into this, what do we do with this information? Because I can tell you from me, when Vice President-elect Kamala Harris was put into this position as of late with the election, what I watched happen on social media sites and just tearing her to pieces and then tearing each other to pieces if we were celebrating what was going on.
Yeah.
It was heartbreaking to me because, and here's something that people may not have thought of, 100% of U.S. vice presidents until 2020, 100% were white men.
Yeah.
100%. 98% or whatever, I can't do the math right in my head right now, but we've had one non-white president.
Yeah.
And all men. So I think that to celebrate, like for my daughter Issy, to celebrate the fact that on the screen, a woman in a place of decision making. And the saddest thing is we feel like we have to always do a disclaimer around being able to celebrate, like, well, let me make the list. Of course, I don't agree with all of her policies and procedures. Of course, this.
Yeah.
Instead of just being able to say, man, a black woman has just been elected to a position of power and decision making. One of my favorite quotes as of late, and I'm not like some women's liber, but I do think in following in the footsteps of Jesus, I see him valuing women so strongly in the face of culture that said, oh, no. Marginalized, oppressed, put them over here. Mm-hmm. Late Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg says this, and I have as a sticker in my computer, women belong in all places where decisions are being made. I love that as a woman. I want to lead alongside men. I'm not saying I want to rule over. I'm like, give me a seat at the table.
Yeah.
And don't, when men get up to speak or do something, they never have to think through the fact that the audience is considering X, Y, and Z. When I get up to speak, I feel like I have to apologize for being a woman, make sure everyone knows I was invited to stand in this position.
Yeah.
And that's sad.
That is horrible.
Now, here's why I think these can sometimes relate. I can't walk into a room and, take off my womanness.
Right.
You can't walk into a room and not be black.
Yeah.
And because of the racialization, and I know people are like, gosh, I always talk about racism, but here's the deal, and we're going to unpack this at another Let's Talk About It. Racism is a Velcro sin. Mm-hmm. I just heard that recently. A lot of things stick to it.
Yeah.
And representation is one of those things. It's important for me to teach my children to be able to celebrate something worth celebrating in our country, which is for a nation that forever, even under the banner of the Bible, raised up the KKK. Many pastors, many people in Christian influence would wear hoods and white robes and then stand in the pulpit on Sunday.
Yeah.
Many, like thousands.
Yeah.
And so when we have that history in our nation that, well, we're going to stand for this and we're going to terrorize for this, and but then we're going to, read our Bible. And interestingly enough, I have the same story open in my Bible today where that's just wrong. That's just wrong to have done that. And we can't just wish it away, that mindset would go away. It's important for us to have equal representation of voices in our ears as Christians. That's something I would say. That may be a little different than the direction we were going to go. Mm-hmm. But Jesus did that. He announced himself as the resurrection and the life first to a woman. Mm. The resurrection and the life, the very thing that we stand on, that we celebrate at Easter, that even at Christmas we celebrate him coming. He didn't first announce it to the Pharisees or announce it to his disciples. He announced it in a moment of weeping with his friends, that he was the resurrection and the life. And because he had come on the scene, everything was going to be okay.
Yeah.
To Martha. That's what it's powerful.
That is.
So I absolutely think that we have seen our country not celebrate representation properly. There are things worth celebrating right now because of who is in positions of power.
Yeah, absolutely. So real quick, what we do with all of this, I think this is actually a good direction for us to end all of our segments with moving forward. It's kind of an application, because that's what this conversation piece is, this segment is how do we practically apply scripture. And so I wrote down 3 things. One, we have conversations.
Right.
Talking about hey, this is what I'm learning. Hey, I'm challenged to consider this from this perspective. If I'm white, hey, I've always seen white superheroes. I've never considered how Black Panther can make a grown man want to grow out his hair. Can you help me understand this?
Yeah.
Or if I'm black, then a black male, as I was thinking about all of this, I did start to think about things differently about raising my 2 daughters and how I love my wife, where it leads into the second point is we have to watch what we say, where we all know, and if you don't know, then that's a good level of ignorance. But the jokes about women for really anything, but trivial things like driving. Like, oh, there's a joke or memes about women are all bad drivers. But now that I have a daughter and I'm thinking fast forwarding 13 years from now where she starts to drive, I don't want her to see me laughing at a meme about women being bad drivers, so where that plants a seed in her mind saying, I'm a woman, so I'm going to be a bad driver regardless. Like, no, I don't want that in her brain and in her heart. So I have to be careful of what I say, not just in the conversations that I have, but going into those conversations, seeking to learn and get insights about, hey, when you do speak and teach, like what runs through your mind when you're on stage and when you're having to kind of list out your qualifications as to why, you have been selected to be on that stage in that time. But also continuing on and saying, man, I want to be careful that what I say does not discourage, but it truly does edify for women, for people of color. And then the third thing is we influence what we can, where, like you said, the way that we raise our children, when their friends are over at our houses, the conversations that we have together, yes, but do they see that we are intentional to not just have, books on the bookshelf that have a bunch of white faces on it, but that also have people of color, that we don't just have biographies about men in history, but that we have biographies for women in history. Kamala Harris, Ruth Ginsburg, Bader, right?
Yes,
Ruth Bader
RBG.
RBG. I was about to say bitter. But yes, are we making intentional efforts and setting examples for others where they can see, man, this is not the only people of importance.
Yeah.
But others are. It's not just white people who are worthy of being superheroes and that everyone else is in need of saving. But no, we can have black superheroes. We can have female superheroes. Wonder Woman was great. Captain Marvel was great.
Yeah.
I'm excited for the next movies.
Yeah.
And I could go on and on, but
yeah, we should all be in life with people who look different than we do.
Yeah.
Who look opposite, and just engage your mind. Have you ever thought, if somebody asked you, oh, well, what does so and so look like? Oh, typical American, blonde hair, blue eyes. Really? That's typical American?
Right.
So I think it's just
not me.
No, it's engaging our mind and our heart and our souls. Good. So thank you, Kēvin, for sharing today and being willing to encourage us to have this conversation. It's awesome.
Thank you very much for being willing to talk
Let's
about it.
talk about it. I love you guys.
See y'all next week.